At my retirement party, my boss sat me near the trash cans, so I took back my gift and changed everything. The ballroom smelled faintly of roses and champagne. Gold balloons floated above white linen tables, and a banner stretched across the stage. Celebrating 40 years of dedication, Eleanor Greene. I smoothed the skirt of my navy dress, the same one I'd saved for months to afford, and smiled when a waiter directed me toward the reserved section. My chest warmed for a moment. Maybe, just maybe, they had planned something thoughtful after all. But then I saw it. Not a seat near the partners, not near the podium or the stage. My name card sat at a tiny two-top shoved against the swinging doors of the kitchen, where the smell of garlic and dishwater leaked out every time a server pushed through. And right beside it, trash bins tucked half out of sight. "Better here, Eleanor," chirped my boss's much younger wife, balancing a flute of champagne as she gestured. "We don't want you in all the pictures with the partners. It keeps the company image fresh, you know." Her voice was sweet as sugar, but her words hit harder than any slap. The nearby junior associates laughed nervously, their eyes sliding away from mine. 40 years in this firm, and now I was too dated to even appear in their photos. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply set my clutch on the table, reached for the silver-wrapped envelope I'd brought as a gift, and slipped it back into my purse. Then, with a small smile, I walked straight out of that ballroom. Because if they thought seating me by the trash cans was the end of my story, they were about to learn it was only the beginning. The winter wind outside cut sharper than any words inside that ballroom. My heels clicked against the icy Boston pavement as I walked toward my car, the city lights blurring through tears I refused to let fall. 40 years. 40 years of answering phones before the sun rose, typing briefs through midnight deadlines, memorizing coffee orders for partners who forgot my name at Christmas. And tonight, my farewell, I was rewarded with a seat beside trash cans. The humiliation pressed down heavy, but beneath it was something deeper, exhaustion. I remembered my first day at the firm. I was 27, nervous, clutching a thrift store purse, wearing a skirt that was already out of style. The senior partner had shaken my hand and said, "Welcome to the family, Eleanor," and I believed him. I remembered the nights when my husband, Daniel, was still alive, how he'd meet me at the tea station with a paper bag of Chinese takeout. "You work too hard, Elle," he'd joke, kissing my forehead. But after he passed, the firm became the only place I had left. My refuge, my routine. I thought loyalty mattered. I thought sacrifice meant something. But in that moment, standing in the dark parking lot with snowflakes landing in my hair, reality hit. To them, I was already invisible. A relic. A liability for the glossy images they wanted to post online. And yet, a flicker of memory tugged at me. 3 months earlier. A dusty storage room. My hands rifling through old case files when I stumbled across a folder that didn't belong. Certificates, my late husband's old stocks, nearly forgotten. On a whim, I'd checked the value. I nearly fainted. What Daniel once called a little gamble was now worth $45 million. That night, I hid the certificates in my desk drawer, heart pounding. No one knew. Not the partners, not the associates, not even the boss who'd seated me beside trash bins. As the snow crunched under my shoes, I realized maybe they had discarded me, but I was holding a secret they could never imagine. And suddenly, the humiliation began to harden into something sharper, something dangerous. 3 months before that humiliating retirement party, I'd been assigned to clear out the firm's dusty storage room, a chore no one else wanted. Old files stacked to the ceiling, yellowed contracts tied with twine, boxes stamped with dates older than most of the junior attorneys. I was sorting through one box labeled Personal Daniel Greene, my late husband's name. My breath caught. Daniel had worked in finance before his cancer took him at 55, but I thought I'd already handled all his paperwork. Inside, wrapped in brittle tissue paper, were stock certificates. I brushed the dust away and read the name, Mediskin Technologies, Inc. I remembered vaguely a tiny biotech startup Daniel had mentioned decades ago, back when he called it a moonshot bet. Curiosity pushed me to check. That night I typed the ticker into my laptop and froze. The stock was no longer pennies. It was worth hundreds each. Daniel hadn't bought a handful of shares. He had bought 40,000. My fingers trembled as I calculated nearly $45 million. For a long moment, I just sat there in the glow of my screen, the silence broken only by the hum of my old radiator. My stomach clenched. After decades of making do of clipping coupons, living in a cramped apartment, eating reheated soup for dinner, I was, overnight, wealthier than the very partners who sat at the head of that law firm. No one knew. Not my colleagues who passed me in the hall without eye contact. Not my boss who praised 40 years of service with one hand while seating me by the kitchen door with the other. Not even my son, who called once a month mostly to ask if I needed help paying my electric bill. I knew immediately. I would tell no one. The next morning, I hired an attorney, a woman younger than my own granddaughter, but sharp, discreet, and loyal to the core. We transferred the shares into a trust under a different name. We opened accounts. We planned purchases. Quietly, strategically. And as I signed each paper, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the secretary at the bottom of the ladder. I wasn't the widow scraping by. I was the woman holding 45 million reasons never to be humiliated again. The Monday after discovering my fortune, I still rode the same crowded subway into downtown Boston, still wore my sensible flats and carried my faded tote bag. To everyone at the firm, I was the same Eleanor, reliable, invisible, forgettable. But inside, I was already rewriting my life. My first stop after work that week wasn't the grocery store. It was a discreet law office on Beacon Hill. My young attorney, Claire, guided me through every step. Together, we set up a trust, one that carried my husband's name instead of mine. We filed paperwork, moved assets, and layered protections so deep no curious colleague or greedy relative could trace them back to me. Next came the townhouse. I'd walked past that historic brick row home on Louisburg Square for years, always telling myself it belonged to another world. Now, it was mine. I signed the deed in silence, the real estate agent chattering about renovations I could consider once I secured financing. She blinked when I handed over proof of a cash transfer. Financing wasn't necessary. Furniture was delivered in stages, discreetly on weekends. A mahogany writing desk, a leather armchair like Daniel used to love, heavy curtains in deep green velvet. I moved a few boxes from my cramped apartment each night, never enough to draw suspicion. By day, I typed memos and fetched coffee. By night, I was building a new life brick by brick, secret by secret. And still, I held on to the silver-wrapped envelope, my retirement gift for the firm. Inside was not a watch or flowers, but a signed pledge. $5 million earmarked for a charitable endowment in the company's name. A gesture I had once thought generous, but after the way they had seated me by the kitchen door, next to clattering dishes and trash bins, I began to rethink. Why should people who saw me as disposable benefit from my loyalty one last time? The gift stayed in my purse, waiting, because when the day came, I would not be the quiet secretary shuffling to her seat by the kitchen. I would be the woman they never saw coming. 2 days after that humiliating party, the phone rang in my tiny apartment. It was Harold, the managing partner. His tone was smooth, polite, the way people sound when they want something. Eleanor, we were so surprised you slipped out early. The night just wasn't the same without you. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Oh, I'm sure it was wonderful," I said, folding laundry with one hand. "Don't worry, I still have my gift. I'll deliver it when the moment is right." A pause. I could almost hear his curiosity prickle through the line. To him, a gift meant a watch, a plaque, maybe cookies. He had no idea I was holding an envelope worth $5 million, and even less idea what I intended to do with it. That same week, whispers started. One of the junior partners swore he'd seen me stepping out of a black town car in Beacon Hill. Another claimed I'd been spotted touring a townhouse with a famous interior designer. Suddenly, the people who had walked past me for decades without eye contact were stopping by my desk with fake smiles. "Eleanor, you look radiant. Have you done something new with your hair? Eleanor, we should have lunch sometime, my treat." I simply smiled and went back to my typing, but the real strike came quietly. At the monthly staff meeting, when the partners announced a cut to the paralegal's overtime pay, I raised my hand, something I had never done in 40 years. "Excuse me," I said evenly. "Perhaps if the firm had an endowment for support staff, they wouldn't have to beg for scraps." The room fell silent. Eyes turned to me, wide with shock. I never spoke at these meetings. "An endowment?" One of the partners repeated, half scoffing. "Yes," I replied, voice calm but firm. "It's something I've been considering for people who actually hold this firm together." A ripple of murmurs spread around the table. The associates looked intrigued. The partners looked uneasy. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. That was my first strike, a hint of the power I now held, wrapped in just enough mystery to make them restless, and judging by the sudden flurry of lunch invitations that appeared on my calendar the next day, it had landed exactly as I intended. The invitations multiplied. Partners who hadn't spoken more than 2 sentences to me in years suddenly wanted me at steakhouse dinners, charity luncheons, just a friendly catch-up. At first, I played along. I sat through their small talk, listening as they circled me like sharks testing the water. "So, Eleanor, I heard you moved. Must be a nice little condo uptown, Shem. Retirement can be tricky financially. Do you need any advice managing things? You know, if you ever wanted to leave something behind for the firm, we could set up a legacy fund in your honor." Their smiles were polished, but their eyes were calculating. Then came the mistake. One evening, my boss himself showed up at my apartment unannounced, his young wife in tow, carrying a bottle of wine that cost more than my monthly rent used to be. He stood in my doorway, rehearsed warmth plastered across his face. "We just wanted to check on you, Eleanor. You seemed upset the other night." I looked past him at the wine, at her glittering earrings, at the way her eyes darted toward the silver-wrapped envelope sitting on my coffee table. That was the moment. The moment I saw it plain. They didn't care about me. They cared about what I might be holding. I poured them each a glass, let them settle in, and waited for the ask. It didn't take long. "Eleanor," he began, leaning forward with the tone he once used to close million-dollar deals. "We've been talking. You've given this firm your whole life. If you were planning some sort of donation, it would mean the world if we could announce it publicly. It would elevate the firm's reputation tremendously." There it was, not even subtle. I set my glass down carefully. My voice was steady, almost gentle. "I appreciate your concern, but tell me, when you seated me by the kitchen door at my retirement party, was that also about elevating the firm's reputation?" His wife froze. His jaw tightened. For once, he had no script prepared. The silence stretched until I stood, smiling politely. "I think this evening is over." I opened the door and let the cold Boston air sweep in, their expensive coats clutched tight as they shuffled out. That night, alone in my townhouse, I sat at my mahogany desk and looked at the silver envelope. They thought they could humiliate me, then manipulate me. They had no idea I was just getting started. The firm's annual shareholders' gala was held in the same ballroom where they'd shoved me beside the trash cans. This time, though, I wasn't there as the secretary everyone overlooked. I walked in wearing a deep emerald dress, pearls that once belonged to my mother, and a quiet smile that unsettled more than a dozen polished faces. I'd been invited, of course. By then, rumors of my mysterious fortune had spread like wildfire. They thought this was their moment to reel me back in, to finally coax the gift they were certain I was holding. The managing partner tapped his glass for silence. "We are honored tonight to welcome back our beloved Eleanor Greene," he announced, voice dripping with rehearsed warmth. "She has something very special to share." Gasps, whispers, all eyes turned toward me. I stood slowly, clutching the silver-wrapped envelope I had carried for months. My heels echoed on the marble floor as I walked to the podium. For a heartbeat, I let the silence hang. Then I spoke. 40 years ago, I was told this firm was a family. I believed it. I gave my youth, my energy, my loyalty. And at my retirement party, that family placed me by the kitchen door to keep me out of the photographs. A murmur rippled through the room. Some lowered their eyes. Others fidgeted in their seats. "Tonight," I continued, holding up the envelope, "I was prepared to announce a $5 million endowment in the firm's name. Money that would have provided for your staff, your paralegals, the people you overlook." The partners straightened, eyes gleaming with anticipation. But then I realized something. My voice hardened. Family doesn't humiliate its own. Family doesn't discard loyalty like yesterday's trash. And so this. I tore the envelope clean in half, the paper ripping loud and final in the hushed ballroom. "Will not bear your name." Gasps. One woman clapped a hand over her mouth. The managing partner's face drained of color. I stepped away from the podium, my voice carrying calm and absolute authority. "Instead, the Greene Foundation will fund scholarships and legal aid for secretaries, widows, and anyone who has been treated as invisible. My late husband's name will live on, not yours." The room erupted, whispers, outrage, even a few cheers from junior staff in the back. I walked out as the chandeliers glittered overhead, each step lighter than the last. They had expected my loyalty one last time. Instead, I gave them the only thing they had truly earned. Nothing. A month later, I sat in the sunlit library of my Beacon Hill townhouse, papers spread across my mahogany desk. The Greene Foundation was official now, funds allocated, board appointed, the first scholarships already in motion. Not a dime bore the firm's name. I still passed by the office sometimes, on my walks through downtown. The partners averted their eyes when they saw me. The younger staff, the secretaries, the interns, the paralegals, they nodded, some even smiled. They knew. My name had begun to circulate in whispers. Eleanor, the woman who turned 40 years of silence into one moment of thunder. At night, I would light the fireplace, pour myself a glass of wine Daniel once called too expensive for us, and sit by the window overlooking the cobblestone streets. For the first time in decades, I didn't fall asleep to the sound of exhaustion, but to peace. Did I miss them? The firm? The people who had discarded me? No, because I finally understood. Family isn't who claims you when it's convenient. Family is who sees your worth when you have nothing left to give. And I, Eleanor Greene, the secretary they sat beside the trash cans, would spend the rest of my days ensuring that no one like me was ever treated as invisible again. Sometimes justice doesn't come with raised voices or slamming doors. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in dignity, with the simple act of walking away and never looking back.